Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure on behalf of Brain Injury Australia for me to introduce our international keynote speaker, Dr. Harris Eyre. Harris is a doctor, a neuroscientist, an entrepreneur, and he's a proud Australian as well. We're very grateful for having Harris here join us today and giving a presentation talking about his efforts in boosting global brain health. Thank you, Harris.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Roger. And I'm hoping that my screen is up and sharing and everything looks fine. Thank you to Nick Rushworth in particular for organizing this and inviting me. I'm very grateful to Nick and think very highly of Nick. Nick's very innovative, and Brain Injury Australia is very lucky to have him as the CEO. And I'm glad to be with you virtually in Australia. I'm originally from Mackay in central Queensland and did my medical training in northern Queensland, and now living between California and Texas. So it's good to be with you. I haven't been back to Australia since COVID hit, so I hope to be back before the end of the year. So today I will be talking for about 40 minutes on the topic of brain capital and how I think that it's a useful framework for boosting global brain health. I hope that this talk is interesting to you, that it means something to each of you, and that it ultimately kind of inspires some action. And I have some ideas about potential projects we could work on together. So I'll be talking today, just introducing brain capital, obviously framing it relevant to brain injury, which is why we're all here today, talking a bit about technology innovation, investing innovation, economic innovation, policy innovation from local to global contexts, and then I look forward to a very robust Q&A session. The contention we have with this brain capital framework or brain capital movement is that the world is really kind of awash with brain challenges, from things on the left-hand side, more sort of clinical related challenges like stress, depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, long COVID, TBI, recurrent concussions. And then on the right-hand side, we have sort of non-clinical brain challenges, things like misinformation spread and disinformation that's causing things like insurrections and political volatility around the world, and then education losses, particularly due to COVID. So the argument that we have with this work is that these brain challenges are harming to our brain health, and that the confluence of them is going to be really hard for us to sustain as a species, if you will. We do think that this is quite existential stuff. And we argue that if the economy is that dinner plate kind of circle on the right, that brain issues are considered as an externality. They're really not thought about in modern economics at a global level, relevant to sort of heads of state and senior economists and senior bankers around the world. Brain issues need to be thought of more seriously, just like climate previously has been not factored into economics, and also viruses. But we know that climate issues are absolutely shocking the economy, and so they are starting to be factored in. And then viruses, of course, with a pandemic, we know that they're very shocking to the economy. So we're obviously trying to make the argument that brain challenges and brain things need to be factored into the economy. And we know that famous quote here, that GDP, which is a fairly dogmatic measure for modern economics, measures everything except anything that's worthwhile. So we need to do better. Let's put the brain at the center of the economy. Let's sort of empower all of you in the audience and make you really important to policymakers and really important to businesses. So part of this is a rallying cry to sort of celebrate all of you and all the advocacy and clinical work and research that you're all doing. Brain capital is this instrument, you could say, that where I'm talking about today. It includes brain health and brain skills in the brain economy. Very simple algorithm: brain health and brain skills in the brain economy. We've published on this in a number of different locations. Brain capital, you could think of it as a couple of different things. One is it's kind of a framework. You can see brain health, brain skills, brain economy is a framework. It's kind of a movement for action that you'll get the gist of by the end of my talk. But we could also think of it as a novel economic asset, a completely new asset class that could be quantified and then used as an instrument to do new modeling and different types of policy making. So if we think about the brain economy, it's really like a neuroscience or brainy knowledge economy. Many of you would have heard of the knowledge economy. The brain economy, cognitive skills are increasingly in demand. Innovation is a really important output of the knowledge of this economy. And the brain economy, of course, is one where COVID has harmed our brains, maybe less so in Australia because COVID was so well controlled, but in many other parts of the world, it's a big issue. On the positive side, the positive parts about the brain economy is that stigma rates are falling in many parts of the world, not perfectly low, but they're falling in many areas, and the neuroscience discoveries are increasing. So we have sort of the brain economy is both a good and a bad thing, but it's, if you will, the canvas upon which we live our lives. Brain health, as you all know, encompasses cognition and emotional challenges. It's this kind of way of thinking about mental health and neurology in a more optimistic sense, not just deficit focused, talking about problems, but thinking about deficits and strengths as well. And I like brain health because it's a kind of new framing and it doesn't have as much baggage as other terminologies. But of course, brain health is something that is being defined and we need to continue to work on that. But it's a more hopeful concept. Brain skills are really skills that are relevant to the current economy. And you all know about these: emotional intelligence, social, cultural intelligence, resilience, which is so important in this world. And as the world gets more volatile with more climate shocks and financial challenges and, potentially the prospect of more pandemics, resilience is really critical, right? We really need that. We need to be adaptable as well in this world as technology changes at a more rapid pace and globalization is either advancing or receding as we see. It means we need to kind of stay nimble. So all of these skills are really critical in what we factor into brain capital. And we argue that, thank you very much to Jay Weatherall for these insights. Jay is a colleague in this work, the former Premier of South Australia. We argue that here we have a brain capital gap in society, and we argue that it's only going to get wider over time. The gap will increase. We have existing inequalities. People that are lower on the brain capital sort of scale, if you will, they're the ones that maybe have less educational attainment or more sort of mental health neurological challenges. They're the ones that are more at risk of losing their jobs due to automation. If they lose a job, they have less purpose, get kind of despondent, end up with depression, anxiety challenges, and then they have less motivation to go and upskill and reskill. So this is a sort of negative downward spiral. But if you're in the have sort of category of brain capital, then you can continue to do more and more knowledge intense work. It's more digital. You get a higher income, you get continued education, you get more mastery, self-efficacy. So this, we do contend that this brain capital framing suggests that this inequality will widen. So if we don't think about brain capital, it's just going to kind of widen. And so, but if we do give it attention, we could prevent this from happening, which I think would make society much more harmonious and cohesive. We published a brain capital grand strategy about 12 months ago. 18 months ago now, rather. We talked about in this having a dashboard to quantify and track brain capital, and we're about to launch that in the next couple of weeks in Europe. We talked about brain capital in all policies. So thinking about the implications of brain capital, not just in the health sector, social sector, digital economy, but transportation, telecommunications, these types of things. And then obviously we think about investing in the grand strategy as well, because if brain capital is a thing or an asset, then theoretically you can invest in it and grow it over time. So I think it just kind of potentially opens up some new ways of funding research and funding clinical care and funding ways, products and services that can make us have better qualities of life. The contention of our colleagues is that fundamentally, if we simplify it all out, if we take care of brain capital, let's say in Australia, that everything else flows from that. Everything else takes care of itself. Productivity gets better, innovation gets better, and well-being gets better as well. So this is, I think, a very optimistic framing of the brain capital movement. Of course, we can think about brain capital over the lifespan, and it's interesting to think about where do we all sit as individuals on this spectrum? What are the blue positive influences that we're enacting in our own lives? And what are the red negative influences that we're enacting in our own lives? And what can we do to better optimize our own brain capital, if you will? And then in our world of work, or whether we're a caregiver or a clinician or a scientist or whatever it may be, can brain capital help us in our day-to-day jobs to be more effective? And of course, we know that brain injury is relevant across the lifespan, whether it's starting with shaken baby syndrome or inflicted traumatic brain injury in children, as it's now known, or brain injury issues of women due to domestic violence, or concussions due to sport, or older adults suffering from brain injury as well, or being inflicted with brain injury. So I think this hopefully is relevant for us all to think about, where do we sit here personally or professionally or within our community. Obviously, this brain capital work cuts across many silos. And of course, there's a recognition that the disciplines that touch on brain capital outlined here are just some of them: neurology, psychiatry, peds, investing, teachers and educators. There's a lot of siloing that's going on. So part of what we're trying to do with brain capital is encourage people to collaborate more, to have conversations with people that are from slightly different disciplines, that can, maybe you can engineer new solutions, new strategies for teaching or clinical care or something together. So we all need to kind of come together, if you will. Brain capital is unique to human capital. I often get asked, how is it different? And obviously, brain capital is focused mostly on the brain, and the brain relevant to the modern economy and life. And we really drill down into health and skills, as you can see, in a lot of detail. Brain capital, on the other hand, when brain capital looks at skills, it's measuring more sort of crudely years of schooling, formal qualifications, and wage rates. So not a lot of sort of granularity, if you will, of the way that it measures skills. So we're trying to be complementary to human capital and also additive as well. So we're all here today to talk about brain injury. I think that you guys know a lot about brain injury in the room. You're much more expert than me. Obviously, it's a very serious issue. It's somewhat of a silent epidemic at the moment that you're all doing great work, and Nick and Brain Injury Australia are doing well to sort of promote it further. But many people are affected. Brain injury, particularly TBI, is associated with an increased likelihood of dementia in later life. And it's obviously associated highly concurrently with depression and issues. So I would argue that brain injury is, one of the biggest, most important areas that we need to think about with this brain capital movement. How do we support the field of brain injury to develop more effective solutions and get more notoriety and respect amongst the community and policymakers and businesses? I just saw this, obviously, a couple of days ago, again, to say that concussion is on everyone's minds in the world of sport, with modifications on the concussion guidelines, particularly for World Rugby. So really hot topic. It's almost, it seems now, not a day goes by that brain injury isn't brought up, and it's really much more appreciated on how these different things in community like rugby affect our brains. Intimate partner violence is a sad issue to think about relevant to TBI, but something that we really do need to think about. The United Nations, of course, said that intimate partner violence related TBI was a shadow epidemic of the recent COVID pandemic. Sorry, a shadow pandemic, if you will, of the COVID pandemic. And the pandemic, of course, is still not over. But really, I thank you very much to Nick Rushworth for bringing this to my attention and to my colleagues. And we've been doing our best to write papers and hold high-level events to try to shine a light on this issue, to raise awareness, and ultimately to raise resources to try to do something about it. 1 in 3 women have experienced intimate partner violence before COVID. The statistics are probably higher right now. Really, up to 90% of people who suffer from intimate partner violence report head, neck, and face injuries, which result in TBI. 1 in 10 women have been strangled by an intimate partner, which of course we know can lead to neurological implications. So part of what we're trying to do with our brain capital movement is bring awareness and outline the importance of trying to tackle this issue, because it goes too often in the shadows. And I did notice the other day there was a wonderful article published in a Cell Press journal, which outlined policy and health service initiatives for TBI relevant to women in particular. So I encourage people to check that out, really thinking through from a health system perspective and a research perspective, how do we try to understand the sex and gender differences in intimate partner violence related TBI and just TBI for women as well. So I think very nice framework, and there's a lot of work to be done in this area. Here's a paper that we published recently with Nick Rushworth and colleagues from the OECD and Eve Valera from Harvard, highlighting the importance of this issue. And it was interesting that this issue, this article rather, got so much clicks and attention and interest on the internet that Psychiatric Times made this as part of their print edition of the journal. So just a small way that we're doing trying to get attention to this issue. So long COVID now I wanted to talk about as another way of framing brain injury and obviously its impacts on brain capital. I know that there are other speakers that are specifically talking to you about long COVID, so I don't want to go into a great amount of detail for you. These slides were prepared with thanks to my Canadian colleague, Inez Jayapurwala, who runs VINEX, which is a leading viral neuroexploration lab based out of Montreal. Inez and VINEX is really wonderful in what they're doing. So if anyone wants to learn more, please check their website out. So long COVID, as we all know, is the extended symptomatology of COVID. It includes issues like fatigue, shortness of breath, and cognitive dysfunction, which we particularly want to talk about today relevant to the brain. It's really the lingering effects of COVID. And it's an enigmatic issue that requires obviously a lot of research to try to pin it down and understand what's the biology, what's the profile of this issue, and are there different variants of it and how it affects people, different syndrome types. We know that 10 to 30% of COVID survivors are experiencing long COVID. Again, it's kind of enigmatic. And women are disproportionately impacted by long COVID, which is obviously another compounding issue in addition to the previous topic that I talked about relevant to intimate partner violence that's impacting women disproportionately. Relevant to brain health, of course, the symptoms of long COVID can include headaches, brain fog, chronic fatigue, memory and concentration challenges. So obviously this is at a global scale impacting heavily brain health and brain capital, impacting people's ability to work, to be educated, to be good family members, to be contributing members of society. And relevant to my prior comment, Australia, maybe with gross numbers, isn't as significantly impacted with long COVID as other countries because of the relatively lower rates of COVID infection in Australia. But Australia certainly has these issues need to be addressed, but Australia has great science and clinical care and can help other countries around the world, whether it's Pacific Islands, Asia, or further afield as well. So Australia has, I think, an important role in trying to tackle these issues. Inez has written a couple of articles in the Financial Post, which is the Australian sort of paper or the financial leading newspaper in Canada. I encourage you to check it out. She's done a really nice job of linking long COVID neurological sequelae to economics, and particularly talking about labor force disruption in Canada and how long COVID could be worsening that as people is really just struggling to get into the workforce again, or if they're leaving the workforce because of these issues. So I think this is really big economic impacting stuff that this is a nice, on an optimistic note, this is a nice way of framing neuroscience, how it is so relevant to modern economics. You know, heads of state and premiers and such need to pay attention. We published an article in Brookings recently, which kind of goes a little bit further, looking at the economic and societal impacts of long COVID on our brains. And thank you to Carol Graham, who's a colleague at Brookings, for publishing this. We talked a lot about the educational losses of COVID, particularly in the United States, but all around the world. They talk about a generation being lost of young children that have had disrupted education for a number of years. So this is obviously impacting brains, impacting brain development. workplace productivity I talked about before, long COVID can reduce that significantly, or just the mental health challenges resulting from COVID and the sort of lockdowns and isolation. And potentially dementia rates are getting worse because of the robust number of challenges on older adults with isolation and COVID during the pandemic. So our argument in this brief blog post is that we need a coordinated whole of government approach. And I'm sure that Australia is thinking along the same lines as well, and be a good one for us to discuss. So now I want to get into the technology piece of solutions for brain injury. Deloitte and the World Economic Forum did a wonderful review that they published last year, looking at all of the different types of novel technologies in mental health or brain health. It's easily available on the internet. You just Google it, you'll be able to find it. Very brilliant resource that really profiles the gamut of different types of technologies. And many of you will know there's sort of app-based treatments, virtual assistants or chatbots, telehealth. There's gaming that can be therapeutic. There's new games that are being developed for ADHD therapy, for example. There are different types of brain stimulation that are non-invasive. There's also some new invasive brain stimulation. AI and big data is helping us to understand the complexity of the brain and all those neurons that are all wired together between our ears. Augmented and virtual reality is being developed into therapies for anxiety, depression, etc. And of course, digital phenotyping, the ability to use these smart devices that we all have now, or many of us have, to look at new types of biomarkers and match these digital biomarkers, looking at steps and social interaction based on how much we're texting on our phone with genetic data or other types of biological data. So we are in an amazing expansion phase of new products and services for brain health. And the US is the hotspot for this stuff, but there is a growing ecosystem of brain health technologies in Australia. There's an exponential increase in the number of startups, and the investment capital, particularly from venture capital going into this, is also exponentially increasing. There was $5 billion invested in venture capital money invested in brain health technologies last year, which is way more than double the year before. So this is a really exciting area for new products and services for people that are struggling with brain challenges. This is one that most of you probably know about. Roche Diagnostics has developed a new diagnostic system, a blood-based test for TBI. So it's good to see, I think, a big pharmaceutical company getting involved in TBI innovation, mainly showing this to demonstrate that there are innovations occurring. And good Australian innovation coming in treatment now, coming out of the University of South Australia, a drug to halt dementia after multiple head injuries, recognizing that head injuries are associated with an increased likelihood of dementia in later life. And so therefore, there's some early studies in animal models, albeit so early days, looking at how the drug can prevent tau protein buildup in the brain, which is a manifestation of dementia. And tau is one of these toxic proteins that if you can clear it out or prevent it from developing, then it's a positive thing for the brain. So nice to see this coming out of Australia, and nice to see, again, innovation in the TBI field. And then there's some interesting preventative approaches as well. Preactive Technologies is a company out of the US. You can check out their website. They're trying to develop a stimulation system to actually prevent brain injury. The whole idea is that when you're braced for an impact in a car or on the football field, that your brain does certain physiological responses to protect itself from serious injury. If you just get hit on a football field without being prepared for it, without bracing, tremendous damage happens. But if you're braced, much less. So this company is developing a series of sensors and way of stimulating this innate brace response. Could be used on the football field if you have sensors on your helmet to brace you before you get hit, or it has military applications as well. If you're perhaps going over a roadside bomb, you can have sensors on the side of a Humvee or something, which can sense the flash and the impact before it comes to the people inside the car, and can brace them for it and help to protect their brain. So I'd say this is a whole new brave world of preventative approaches, and happy to talk further about it because it's really sci-fi stuff. But as we understand better the physiology of the brain and how it protects itself, it opens up these opportunities for new companies. And then, as I mentioned, venture capital investing, which is this type of capital that comes in to help early stage science and companies to develop products and services to go out and help people in the clinical world and in society, really is increasing in the brain health field. Here are some examples of specifically themed investment funds that focus on the brain. HECA is a French fund that focuses on brain health. Dementia Discovery Fund focuses on dementia, and LSP also focuses on dementia. HECA is France, Dementia Discovery Fund is in London, and LSP is in the Netherlands. So the question is, where is Australia's brain health fund? We need to think about that because it really helps the local ecosystem to flourish if you have capital available to those entrepreneurs that are looking to build businesses. This is an overview of the HECA Fund. It's wonderful that it's the first fund in the world that's actually looking at brain capital. So I'm a pro bono advisor to this fund and helping them as they get off the ground. It's just wonderful to see that they're taking the brain capital theme and running with it. And they're really looking at how do they be a responsible investor, helping these startups to be more successful. And they also recognize that them being in France is important, that they're trying to do investments outside of the US, mostly to try to build up the non-US ecosystem. So we could try to engage them in the Australian ecosystem and see if they can help us or collaborate with them out of Australia as well. Venture philanthropy is another interesting model. Venture philanthropy is the idea that many of the technologies you can see in this graphic are lost through the valley of death when they, technologies and startups can be initiated with government grants, and then they're obviously purchased on the other end by big pharma companies and other big companies. But there's this middle ground, which is called the valley of death, where you need investment capital and you need to find a way of getting your product into the marketplace. Venture capital can be a challenge because these venture capital funds want quite high returns on their money that they invest. So venture philanthropy is a way of getting philanthropists, wealthy individuals or wealthy foundations or other pension funds to more invest and not have as high return expectations, which is obviously important in neuroscience because it can take quite a while to work out how to get a complex neuroscience IP piece of technology into a product, into a service, and then into the market and generating sufficient commercial activity. So venture philanthropy is this way of really trying to be more patient with these technologies as they get into the market. Here are some examples of venture philanthropies that are in other areas of healthcare. Broadview is cardiology. Bright Edge is cancer. This one is type 1 diabetes, the JDRF, and then the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. My contention is, where is it for brain injury? Maybe we could do that in Australia. Maybe it's another project for Nick to think about, although we will support you, Nick, in thinking this through. But so interesting opportunity for the brain injury field to get into this area. Now I want to talk a little bit about aligned policy innovations. It's one thing to have, a framework and science and public health and, technologies and investing. But if you don't have aligned policy, then, that's really important in completing this kind of circle, and each thing mutually benefits the other. So here is one example in the brain capital field we published this in the Brookings Institution journal, proposing that in the office of the United States President, in the White House, they have all these councils, which are great. We argue that they need to have a brain capital council. A brain capital council would ensure that brain things relevant to economics or gender or tech or whatever do not slip between the cracks. Brain capital would be the clearinghouse and the coordination center for all this stuff. So in this graphic, you can see here in black, we have the councils listed out. I'm sure you've heard of the National Security Council or the Council of Economic Advisors. And in blue, we have the ways that brain capital are relevant to these different councils. So the economic advisors, for example, could look at the costs of mental health issues, brain injury issues, Alzheimer's issues. The Gender Policy Council could look at the inordinate, disproportionate effects of brain challenges on women. With Alzheimer's disease is far more common in women. Intimate partner violence, TBI, and long COVID is more impacting of women, so on and so forth. So you can see we're proposing this new Brain Capital Council as a way of modifying the governance of the United States. And so what would be the equivalent in Australia? Here are just some of the publications and podcasts that we've done with Brookings. You can check them out at your own leisure if you're interested, and glad to talk further about what this all means and how we could relate it to the Australian context. Was fortunate that recently the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus in the US, a colleague of mine, Eric Lenz, who's a professor of psychiatry and neuroscience, presented on long-haul COVID and the neurological implications, and he framed it in the context of brain capital. So, we're getting on the map with the Congress in the United States with brain capital. So it's great to see that it's a useful instrument, brain capital, in getting these congressional people, Democrats and Republicans alike, to think more about the importance of the brain in society and economy. Here is a couple of final slides now. This is our work at the OECD. The OECD is an international organization with 38 member countries. It's sort of like a sister to the United Nations, I think of it in simple terms. And we've been fortunate that the OECD has taken up our work in brain capital, calling it Neuroscience-Inspired Policy Initiative. And we've had good success in the last 12 months launching this and getting papers and stuff written about what we do. And we're really trying to get now into a policy action phase. And it's interesting that the new Secretary General of the OECD is an Australian former politician, Matthias Cormann. So there's an Australian connection to the OECD, which is great. Here's a selection of, in the last 2 years, of all of the things that have popped up around brain capital, not least of this conversation today. But, for example, in Latin America, in a few months, we'll be going there to teach a course on brain capital policy and economic innovations to Latin American policymakers and clinicians, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank. So things are sort of happening around the world, and it's great to see that we're being useful to people. And we look forward to trying to help different regions of the world solve issues in their own cultural and ecological context. And we're just here to provide some ideas and then do what we can to support. Here is a launch event for our new Brain Capital Alliance, moving beyond our work just with OECD to now lots of different organizations together. This is on July the 4th. It'll be a hybrid event in person in Brussels, Belgium, but also online. So if you're interested, you're most welcome to join. You can find this on the internet. This is hosted by the Center for European Policy Studies, which is a big think tank in Europe. And we'll be talking about this Brain Capital Alliance that we're launching, and then also person-centered approaches to brain health. So we're doing our best to continue to raise awareness. And we have some great speakers from different countries and different organizations, World Health Organization, European Brain Council, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're interested to learn more and follow us on our journey, and then see about what we're doing in Europe that could be relevant to Australia, then please check this out. This is just a landing page for the Brain Capital Alliance, which is going to be coming out in the next couple of days. Glad to discuss with people about how they can get involved in the Alliance. We want to take a team approach. We need lots of people to help us out. So the more the merrier. If you're from organizations or you just want to individually support us with helping us to carry the load with different types of writing or advocacy, then please reach out. Here's a nice summarization that all roads lead to the brain. When we strip it all down, what is this about? It's all roads lead to the brain, this precious organ that we have. So depression, anxiety, environment, air pollution, climate change, TBI, education, all lead to the brain and either have positive or negative effects. This is a very simple takeaway that we try to offer to policymakers when we speak to them. Now, finally, saying that it would be interesting to consider if we could develop a policy lab for brain injury in Australia, which would be a disciplined approach and methodology for accelerating innovation in brain injury across policy, economics, science and technology, finance. Could we do something in Australia? Could we do it at a state level or at a regional level or a city level? It'd be a good thing to get your take on and see if this would make sense. It would seem to me to be very novel in a way of linking this brain capital and policy work with brain injury. There are existing examples of policy labs. Here's just one of them that was published in a Nature journal 2 years ago now, talking about identifying issues, developing policies, implementing policies, and evaluating policies. I know that Nick does a lot of this already, and Brain Injury Australia does a lot of this already. So, could there be a way of bringing brain capital into this kind of mix to further elevate the great work that you're doing and integrate it? So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this has been stimulating for you, that it's kind of stretched your mind with some new thinking. And I look forward to discussing your thoughts on it. Thank you very much.
Hi, Harris. I just had a question. I think it's really great in terms of looking to work with Brain Injury Australia around doing this. But Brain Injury Australia's situation with the introduction of the NDIS into Australia, any funding that's available to organisations like Brain Injury Australia, it has to be sort of project-based, and I would suggest that this probably sits outside of that. So how do you see Brain Injury Australia being able to work with you around that, given that funding restrictions? It's a bit like Catch-22. We need funding to be able to work to then generate some of that philanthropic or investment funding you were talking about. How do you see that working given our current funding restrictions?
Yeah, well, let's find a way to work around the funding restrictions. I think that this would be a good conversation for us to have with a group of folks from Brain Injury Australia and Brainstorm. I'd say that we could develop some projects together. We could look at philanthropy, some government funding, perhaps from the MRFF or state governments. So I'm confident we can. I want to be helpful though into projects that you guys are trying to achieve. So let's talk it through. But I do recognize the constraints of the funding that you're mentioning. So we can think around that. And one of the things that I've been grateful for learning in the US is the role of philanthropy and unconventional funding, whether it's from retirement funds, corporate philanthropy, etc. So I'm all game for thinking outside the box.
Harris, it's Nick. Tanya and I do in fact go back a long time, and if I can pick up on what I think part of what she was trying to say, which is about the translatability, the interaction between the really big picture stuff that you're talking about and the individual lives of people who may benefit from whatever research you're talking about, for example. I think one of the challenges for the likes of Brain Injury Australia in working with the world of research is there's a lot of stuff going on, but in terms of engaging consumers, end users in that research, the benefits often don't apply to them or they're far away in time. I'm just wondering about where you see some really genuine efforts at genuine consumer engagement, patient engagement.
Yeah, I think you guys are on the right track. I think, Nick, you're brilliant with encouraging this, and I'm sure that Tanya sounds like a force of nature and well and is driving this. I think around this, thinking through the pipeline of different types of innovation that is coming for brain injury, from basic science through to clinical trials, through to products and services and policy innovation. For me, it's about how do you get people living seriously with these challenges involved across the life cycle, from helping with ethics reviews of different types of studies to being involved in participatory engagement in research and having sort of lived experience councils with different universities and research groups, different funding agencies. So for me, it's really thinking through the life cycle of innovation and making sure that there's maximal sort of lived experience engagement across the pipeline. And I think of I think Australia is really pretty good at this. That it's like no specific examples off the top of my head, but I think, Nick, you're kind of like a walking, talking exemplar of this stuff and what you try to do with Brain Injury Australia.
Look, you shouldn't feed too much into Nick's ego, Harris. It's one word of warning I would give you. But look, we've reached our time. We've got to wrap it up for the next session. But on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, Harris. And I get a sense you'll be keen to keep the conversation going with us. So thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the conference.